our Green Themes presentation.
Right.
And tonight, we will have a Green Themes presentation on the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan by LeRoy Harvey, who is our Township's Recycling Coordinator. Delighted to have you back here with us once again.
Thanks.
We have had some ongoing reports from our representative on the energy team about the development of this climate action plan, and we're really looking forward to hearing about it in more detail.
Thank you for having me. This is the first time we've really come public in a serious way to invite participation in this plan. And we are looking forward to ideas that you have, not just in the plan, but how we might engage others in this, in fulfilling some of the goals that are outlined here. I wonder if, let's see here. Is that?
No signal.
No signal, okay. It's good to know that, thanks for catching me before I'm halfway through the presentation. I could press random buttons, but anyone else familiar with how to? Okay. Hey, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Sitting on that.
Okay, let's see if I got my keys correct here. Well, as you are aware and have been involved, Meridian has done a lot to keep the township green, to expand and help residents appreciate the environment here. And this this plan is kind of a way to build on some of the successes that have already occurred, and appreciate your efforts to keep Meridian green and channel development in positive ways as you're dealing with tonight. This Sustainability and Climate Action Plan provides a framework, or a green print, if you will, for continuing and expanding on this. And this is what we're seeking your involvement on. It also sheds a light on something that traditionally is not as visible. We don't see how much energy we're using right now with the computer and the lights. We have a couple of people in the township that see the energy bills every year, but it's energy and climate change are largely invisible. So this plan gives an opportunity to give a little bit more recognition to some of the issues that we face environmentally and economically and socially. We're also hoping that this plan will help sort of nurture a culture of energy efficiency and environmental stewardship that you are engaged in already. So as I mentioned, we have some members of our team here and up at the, what do you call it, Diaz? And so I appreciate their involvement in creating this draft. And we're doing this for a few different reasons. Energy, we spend a lot of money on energy in the township. We spend about $350,000 annually on street lighting. We spend about $300,000 on electricity and natural gas to power our pumps that pump water and sewage, and to power our buildings. The building we're in right here uses more energy than pretty much any other facility that we have in the township. And then we spend about $100,000 on fuel for our vehicles. Altogether, this generates about 5,000 metric tons annually of CO2 to the atmosphere, which, as we're beginning to understand, affects our climate locally and regionally and globally. Altogether, based on estimates from, I believe it's the Alliance to Save Energy. We spend about $5,000 per person, which equates to roughly $100 million every year on energy. And most of that leaves the township. Over 90% of that money leaves the township every year, creating a bit of a trade deficit. In 2007, the energy team was formed, also motivated by the desire to start to think about climate change. And I've reported on this to you in the past, so I'm going to just go briefly through this. But Meridian became one of over 1,000 communities across the country, and 30 in Michigan, that signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. And a lot of that is due to the efforts of Judy Kindle here in our audience. Thank you, Judy. And she remains active on our energy team. A year or two later, we applied for a grant and were able to complete about $100,000 of energy efficiency improvements in the township. That was what we were calling our Phase 1 energy improvements, and that included some solar demonstration projects as well at Harris Nature Center. We've done a few things. This is just a real brief summary, but in 2012, we got a fairly large grant. We were one of the only townships to participate directly in the Mid-Michigan Program for Greater Sustainability. And we worked with HOMTV to produce some videos that talked about environmental issues such as energy and climate change, also water and wetlands and transportation, energy conservation, that type of thing. Appreciate the HOMTV's involvement in that very much. In 2014, we were able to complete a Phase 2 energy assessments, and we are still hoping to implement those. 2015, we saw some improvements added to the fire station plans. We installed some LED lighting in parking lots, and we continued research on community solar, and have since then reserved, I believe it's 10 panels in the system that's going to be going in adjacent to the township in Bircham Park. 2016, we did some education with a sustainable home tour. We held a virtual solar home tour here, sustainable home tour, in this room right here. And we also recently signed on to the Michigan Green Communities Climate Work Group, and we're hoping to get some further guidance in this plan through working with other communities around Michigan that have advanced further than we have in energy and climate change. A couple other projects, I'm not going to go into that. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website. I will also respond to questions in a few minutes. Can you see this? I can't see what you're seeing, but basically I wanted to mention that this was our Phase 1 energy improvements, and they include things like lighting, high efficiency lighting, real fast payback types of things. And most of these improvements have paid for themselves several times over since they were installed. Over the last 6 years, we've been measuring energy savings, and we've saved about $250,000. That equals about 1 year's energy expenditures for our pumps and buildings. And based on a conservative prediction of what we would save, we're putting 80% of that savings into a revolving energy fund to do more improvements. I think there's about $100,000 in that fund right now. I mentioned the Michigan Green Communities Climate Work Group. We were excited to see how many communities are doing similar types of projects that we can learn from. In fact, the plan draft that you have seen, I brought copies if you don't have it. Was it in your packet, the draft plan? Was that?
No.
Okay, why don't I provide sort of the latest draft. Which is also available online. Thank you. But we feel that local government has a responsibility to do something about this, as you can imagine. And recently received this list of all the communities in Michigan that have climate action plans, and it's pretty impressive. Meridian is listed as a community that's with a plan in development, so it's nice to be on that list. And I appreciate your willingness to learn about this, as well as anyone else who's tuning in. We're open to ideas not just from the commission, but from the public as well. Except for Peter. Peter, no, just kidding. There are also a number of colleges and military bases that have developed climate action plans. You've heard of most of these, so I'm not going to get in a whole lot of detail. And then we have large corporations like General Motors that's committed to 100% renewable energy by 2050. You've all heard of General Motors, probably. We also have a number of communities in Michigan that have developed climate adaptation and resiliency plans. And part of that is because of the weather changes in weather that are predicted as a result of global warming, if you will. We've been learning about this issue, and it's not just about temperatures rising. And I'll get you a copy of the slideshow too, so if you want to come back and refer to any of this. But based on current research, there's the temperatures are rising. They're rising more in the wintertime, and this was new to me. There's also a longer freeze-free season predicted in the next decades. There's also about a 9% increase in annual precipitation, and this varies depending on where you are in the state. There are changes in seasonal precipitation, so we might see warmer springs and more precipitation in the spring versus in the summer months, where we might actually have more drought conditions. So again, there's a lot of variation over the state, but in general, we're potentially seeing a 25% increase in substantial precipitation events. And let's see if I can. So these communities that I mentioned earlier that are developing resiliency plans are looking for ways to kind of mitigate risk. And a lot of them are are located on the coast of Michigan, but some are within the or further inland as well. I'm not going to belabor the climate change, although some people predict that this is one of the most serious environmental and health threats that we face as a planet. But there's also enough reason to proceed or to pursue some of these recommendations, whether or not you are a staunch climate change advocate or not, just by the sheer economic and other environmental benefits that we'd achieve through reducing our energy consumption. So getting to the plan, we've divided it into 5 categories: energy efficiency, renewable energy, recycling and waste reduction, transportation, and water management. And then under each of these categories, we have several objectives. Again, this is a draft, so we're open to changing any or all of this. Looking at energy efficiency, these are a couple of the objectives that we've listed. And under each of these objectives, we have strategies. And altogether, we have over 70 strategies that have been identified so far, and we'll probably be expanding on that as you provide your input. I'm not going to list everything that's in the plan, but just give a couple of different examples in each of the category. This is our list of Phase 2 energy improvements that were identified in a technical energy assessment, and we're hoping to proceed with these fairly soon. This will allow us to put more money into this revolving energy fund and also improve comfort levels and save even more energy. Renewable energy is another section. Looking at developing policies and procedures that encourage the use of renewables, increase renewable energy use in the township facilities itself, etc. Monitor savings. This is the virtual home tour that I mentioned that was held in October in this room. And then there were some follow-up site visits to some of the systems. And we found that partnering with the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, Joanne's been involved with that, and John, has been a kind of a great opportunity to promote solar. Recycling and waste reduction offers other alternatives. We'd like to increase residential recycling rates. We'd like to continue to expand our recycling events and then do further publication or public education about recycling. We're also talking with Granger about maybe expanding the carts in residential neighborhoods. Carts are a good way to increase the participation and the quantity of recycling that goes on. Transportation, of course, is another piece of it. Continuing to decrease the use of fuel in our township fleet. The energy team became aware of some support for electric charging stations, and we were able to put one of those over at the theaters, and we're hoping to do more of that in the years to come. We're still a member of the Greater Lansing Clean Cities Network, and there's some money available for grants coming down the pike, no pun intended. Let's see here. There was recently a public session talking about the integration of electric vehicles, solar energy, and storage, etc. You know, when you've got a car sitting in your driveway 95% of the time, or parking, there's no reason it can't be sort of integrated into your energy system. So we're starting to see more of that. And then water. Understand that one of you is involved with water issues, and hoping to get some additional ideas in that department. Not just in water conservation, but reducing stormwater runoff and getting better at monitoring water usage in the township and the savings from installing efficiency improvements. And looking at rain gardens and how we can, this is the eco roundabout that some of you may have been involved in, and looking at ways to diversify our landscape, retain stormwater, and clean, purify water when it recharges into the groundwater system. I like this slide because it illustrates most of our street lighting is high pressure sodium, or I think we still have some metal halide, but of how much opportunity we still have given some of the existing technology that's available for improving efficiency. We're just beginning to sort of tap the potential, and we feel like this plan will be a leap in that direction. But again, we don't want this to be just a plan that's on the shelf. We want people thinking about what they can do when you go home tonight, and what we can do, how we can integrate this into some of our other planning efforts, and roll it out to the public or other commissions or boards in the area. So with that, one other exciting thing is this peer review meeting on the 22nd. other communities that have been involved with this planning have offered to give us some insights into how we could improve this plan, and we'll be happy to share that with you. But we also look forward for hearing from you, not necessarily tonight, although if you do want to share some questions or ideas, we'll take those down. But before we do that, is there anyone on the committee that wants to add or subtract from something I've said? John? We really appreciate the fact that John is involved with your commission, and I'm sure you do too. But that's been a real asset. Any questions from you? Or?
Question on the CO2. Oh, sorry. Okay, question on the CO2. One thought that's used fairly routinely is when you looked essentially at CO2 emissions for the township, kind of as a whole, based on the township, the governmental and elsewhere, is actually to look at CO2 offsets. So what are your CO2, and balancing that CO2 offset with CO2 production, and using that essentially as a another guiding parameter, whatever, for development. So you can look at uptake by trees, you can look up, green space, and that becomes your uptake of CO2, and try and balance that with CO2 production.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and I'm not sure how clearly we've identified that in the plan, but that's the type of feedback we're looking for. Yeah.
The other thought one with recycling, and this bothers me. I haven't done it yet, but as part of the textbook that I've written, I look at solid waste recycling. And actually in the last 20 years, we've gone backwards in the US. We actually reduce a significantly less percentage of what we use in terms of paper, in terms of glass, etc. Seems counterintuitive, but at least according to EPA statistics, that's what the data shows. What can we do in the township? I mean, one, we pay for, we have Granger, we pay for recycling. It's essentially a negative, right? I pay to recycle. What can we do the other way? That instead of do we subsidize it? Do you pay for essentially not recycling? Is there a way to kind of try and balance that to try and shift this trend? And maybe it's not just, it's not local, the trends, it's nationwide, but to encourage more. And then the last is, you mentioned the increased storm events. One of my biggest concerns, and maybe it's because I come from a civil engineering background, is the impact on traffic, the impact on stormwater quality, the impact on our wetlands. It's very hard to say that what doesn't seem like an issue now isn't going to be an issue in the future as the intensity of our rainfall events increases, and we know they're increasing. So how do we look at that in terms of policy and trying to look at adaptation, resilience? What do we do to change that? And even as far as the increase in droughts over the summer, how do we educate the population that they don't need to water their lawns and deplete the Saginaw aquifer to have a green lawn when, I didn't water mine all summer long, and when the rains came in the September, my grass was as green as my neighbor's. And so what can we do in terms of educating the public as far either alternative planting or changing the the perceptions, I guess, of what a lawn is supposed to look like.
That's quite a
It's all right.
set of questions there.
That's where they at. That's where they at.
Those are
Among
great
those,
questions.
If there's one that you feel like you'd like to respond to, go ahead. But
Well, I just
don't feel obligated to
I think you've.
take them all at once.
I love the questions, and they are good questions. Sometimes the questions are better than the answers. But also, that it points to one of the key points we wanted to make, and that this is an organic document. It's not something to sit on the shelf, but we might address these at different times of the year as different, maybe there's some grant opportunities, or maybe there's some planning opportunities, some ways that we could collaborate between departments and between organizations like the Drain Commission, et cetera, to address things in ways that we can't necessarily predict today. But if we put the question out there, maybe someone else might have ideas, or maybe there's someone doing that in a neighborhood where we can highlight that success story and help maybe shed some light on lawn watering alternatives, for example. That's one of my pet peeves as well. Where it can also show someone the research that it's actually better to let your lawn go dormant rather than keep watering it. Anyway, I hate to answer, I don't want to answer the question. Yeah, yeah.
A brain dump, of all the things that, are in my brain, and I'm sitting here thinking, and there's other opportunities. I mean, we've tried to, like with the Haslett Village Square development, that's how I got on the board, was the senior capstone in civil engineering looked at a comprehensive redevelopment and what could be done. So, there's other things in terms of what can we do across kind of town gown, with MSU, how do we use the resources, how do we look at, we teach hydrology, what do we do, you look at water movement, what can we do together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, LeRoy. Any other questions, comments for the presenter? Ned?
I'd just like to ask if a person wants to, put up solar panels on their house, is there sort of quick access to the townships, or, are there any easy ways to figure out permitting procedures and so forth that are, I basically, if we want to promote these sorts of things, what we don't want to do is find out that when we are contemplating sticking something on our roof, it's going to be bureaucratically. Those kinds of barriers can be can stop people even when they're simple.
Yeah, the planning department has been pretty supportive. I think Meridian is a little more progressive than some communities in that department. But Peter, do you want to add?
I can speak to that, sure. We've come across it several times recently, not as often as we probably hope we will, but what we require is a building permit, and details on the loads to make sure that the roof would support whatever equipment's going up there, and electrical to make sure that it's being connected in the appropriate way. But there are no, as far as I know, and I haven't heard any feedback from residents, major obstacles to getting a building permit to do something like that.
I just want to make sure that people don't sort of view that as, oh, well, if I'm thinking about it, I'm going to be entering bureaucracy world. Okay.
But making that information accessible, and it's my understanding that in some cases a building permit is not required, but I could be wrong. So I need to be educated about that as well.
So if people have questions about that, they should call you, or they should call Peter, or both of you?
Well, LeRoy makes a good point. I think that the two of us, along with the chief building official, should get together and talk about what's required, and maybe put together a pretty basic memo or just a fact sheet for people to have.
The wetland permitting, it's a very detailed set of instructions as to how to complete whatever the permit.
Yeah, now that you bring it
process
up, there could be a perception that it is difficult, and why bother.
is. Right. I'm not
So we
saying
can
it is, I'm
address
just
that.
asking. Yeah, okay. Good.
Thanks, Ned. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I look forward to your comments as you digest some of these ideas, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again.
Thanks.